Hey folks, tonight's first topic is a creepy little truth from the past emotions, fears, and women's mental health were totally misunderstood, misdiagnosed, and sometimes even punished. From ancient medicine to Victorian asylums, from so-called hysteria to dangerous treatments, we're about to dive into centuries of weird and heartbreaking therapies that were once just considered normal. So before you get comfy, take a sec to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually dig what I'm doing here. And drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. It's always fun to see who's joining us from around the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soothing white noise, and let's settle in for tonight's journey. Let's kick things off in ancient Greece, land of philosophers, myths, and some seriously bizarre medical theories. Picture this: you're a woman in 400 BCE, and for weeks now, you've been feeling off. Your chest feels tight. Your heart races for no reason. And sometimes you're hit with full-on panic. You try explaining this to the local healer, who, after a dramatic chin stroke, proudly declares you have a wandering womb. Yep, you heard that right. Those revered hypocrites who gave us the Hippocratic Oath actually believed a woman's uterus had a mind of its own, according to them. If a woman got too emotional, anxious, or heaven forbid, single for too long, her uterus would get all cramped up and start wandering around her body like a lost tourist, up to the chest, down to the legs, anywhere it pleased. And all those symptoms like dizziness, shortness of breath, and trembling. Just the fallout from this gynecological nomad wreaking havoc. Now, the treatments, not exactly what you'd call comforting. No cozy blankets or herbal tea. Instead, doctors would wave pleasant-smelling herbs near your pelvis and foul-smelling ones near your nose, trying to coax the uterus back into place. Imagine lying there while someone flamboyantly wafts burning garlic under your nose like they're conducting a uterus seance. Totally science. And in a society where women couldn't vote, own land, or even wear pants. This weird diagnosis was pretty much the only explanation anyone had for women's suffering. Anxiety wasn't seen as a mental or emotional thing. Nope. It got boiled down to some kind of wonky reproductive behavior. To be fair, the Greeks were working with what they had: no brain scans, no serotonin theories, no trauma-informed care, just blaming everything on a rogue uterus. Like your car breaks down and the mechanic says, "Hey, probably the cup holders shifted." The truth is, women back then felt deep sadness, fear, stress, and anxiety. But instead of checking in on their feelings, they got incense and affirm, "Your womb's out of whack." And so the silence began, not just the silence of misunderstood symptoms, but the silence of stories never told. Now, let's drift to ancient Rome, where civilization was booming, plumbing was impressive, and compassion was still in beta. If you were a Roman woman struggling with anxiety, there was no therapist on speed dial, no hotline to call, and definitely no relaxing bath bombs to toss down the drain. Instead, you were advised to marry or have kids, or both, fast, because according to mostly male medical experts, your emotional misery was just your uterus acting up, They didn't call it anxiety. They called it fur uterinus, which sounds like a Roman battle squad, but was actually their term for women's emotional instability. But instead of asking how they felt, they got handed incense and told their uterus was out of whack. And just like that, the silence kicked in, not just the silence of misunderstood symptoms, but the silence of stories never told. Now, let's drift to ancient Rome, where civilization was blossoming. Plumbing was pretty impressive, and compassion was still a work in progress. If you were a Roman woman battling anxiety, forget about therapists, hotlines, or relaxing bath bombs to toss into the drainage. Nope. Instead, you'd be told to marry or pop out a kid, or better yet, both fast, because according to the mostly male medical pros of the time, your emotional meltdown was just your uterus misbehaving. They didn't call it anxiety. Nope. They called it fur uterinus, which sounds like a Roman battle squad, but was actually their fancy term for women's emotional instability. And if you cried too much, babbled nonsense, or seemed jittery, well, you were probably failing at being a proper lady. The cure: keep having babies, rinse and repeat. A Roman doc named Soranus, who wrote a gynecology textbook, advised women to steer clear of strong emotions. Just stop feeling stuff. Problem solved. He also told husbands to take it easy, which in Roman speak meant no yelling at dinner. If you were a wealthy Roman lady showing signs of anxiety, you might get prescribed booze and music. Not bad, until you remember the diagnosis was basically too emotional and female. Gently now, in Roman speak. That just means no yelling at dinner. If you're a rich Roman lady with anxiety, you might get prescribed some wine and music. Not bad until you remember the diagnosis was based on the idea that your uterus was misbehaving, like a broken machine in a bakery for poorer women. The treatment was more direct herbal mixes, spiritual mumbo jumbo, or just plain ignored. And don't you dare question your husband's authority, laugh at dinner, or cry too long after a miscarriage. That might get you labeled unstable, or worse, possessed by spirits or cursed by gods. Nothing screams compassion like a priest waving chicken bones while you sob on a marble bench. So while Rome hooked us up with roads, laws, and architecture, it gave anxious women nothing but shame wrapped in olive leaves, their pain medicalized, moralized, then outright dismissed. Because at the end of the day, no one asked what they were actually going through. They just wanted to know when the next kid was due. Now, let's tiptoe into the dark corridors of the Middle Ages. When darkness ruled, plagues ran wild, and if a woman was anxious, it probably meant Satan was house-sitting in her soul. Medical knowledge didn't just stall here, it practically reversed. Greek ideas about womb wandering stuck around. But now they came, spiced with a hefty dose of fear, fire, and holy panic. Women with what we'd call anxiety today, shaking, crying, panicking, obsessing, were often seen as spiritually broken, because obviously if your hands shake or you cry at night, it's not trauma, it's demons. The church ruled the healing game, usually through exorcisms, public shaming, or if things escalated, bonfire with your name on it. If a woman admitted to hearing voices, or just acted weird, she could be accused of witchcraft, herbal remedies, astrology, demons, crying too much clearly. The gateway to evil in this era, anxiety wasn't just misunderstood, it was feared, and fear of a woman's faulty body could land her in a convent, drowned in a river, or on trial, with evidence like looking odd during church services. There were also convents and infirmaries where nuns tried to care for mentally suffering women, but without real understanding of the mind. Treatment usually meant long prayers, isolation, and fasting, because nothing soothes the soul like low blood sugar and complete silence. And let's not forget the diagnostic tools of the day. If anxiety made you faint or shake, someone might press a cross to your forehead and watch for a twitch. If you twitched, say goodbye to your goats and get ready to meet the village torchbearer. Truly tragic. These women weren't witches, sinners, or demon enemies. They were just hurting. People tried to breathe through sadness, sleep through fear, but in a world built on fear, a trembling woman became a threat, and those threats were burned away, misunderstood, ignored. Oh, the Renaissance, the golden age of rebirth, art, science, literature. Everything got rediscovered except compassion for women's mental health, which seemed locked away in some medieval dungeon, while Michelangelo carved David and Leonardo sketched helicopters. Doctors were still trying to figure out why women had feelings. Shockingly, the top theory was still that old villain, the uterus. Even though ancient texts resurfaced, they were filtered through newer, fancier interpretations, which basically meant they still blamed women's emotions on being too feminine and anxious, not married yet. That's why panicked time to get pregnant, locked up in a medieval dungeon, while Michelangelo was chiseling David and Leonardo da Vinci was sketching helicopters. Doctors were still scratching their heads about why women had feelings, and surprise, the top theory was the same old villain, the uterus. Even though ancient texts were making a comeback, they were often filtered through newer, refined interpretations, fancy talk for blaming women's emotions as just too feminine and anxious, because obviously you're just not married yet, freaking out. You need to get knocked up, depressed time to bleed out some energy. Yep, leeches, or if you're lucky, you get pain, bleeding, or hot pus in your belly. Docs really believed the body had to be balanced. For women, that meant draining them dry until their soul was calm, or at least until they passed out and stopped talking. And the fix didn't stop there. There were also comfort rituals, like locking yourself in a dark room for days or being told not to read. Because there were comforting rituals, like locking yourself in a dark room for days or being told not to read. Because a woman with too many books might start thinking, and of course, thinking was a direct threat to womb stability. In high society, women with nervous illnesses might be sent to the countryside to rest, which sounds fancy in theory, but usually meant being watched, silenced, and given herbal tonics until they smiled again, or at least faked it. The Renaissance loved beauty. It worshipped harmony and symmetry, but it had no clue what to do with a woman who cried non-stop or couldn't sleep through the night. Emotional pain, especially in women, was seen as uncontrollable, unstable, and inconvenient. So it got hidden, wrapped in silk, locked behind bedroom doors, and labeled women's troubles. Meanwhile, in grand halls where paintings were born and symphonies composed, anxious women quietly shuffled, heads down, wondering if maybe the problem was really inside them, not the world's, not the pressure, not the pain, just them. Because in the age of enlightenment, women's fears were still seen as flaws to hide, not wounds to listen to. As the 17th and 18th centuries rolled in, the world buzzed with progress, so telescopes scanned the skies. Philosophers pondered freedom and reason, and Isaac Newton explained gravity, finally giving humans a better excuse for their own collapses. But if you were a woman suffering anxiety during the Enlightenment, all that reasoning didn't help a bit, because while the world discovered natural laws and human rights, your trembling hands and sleepless nights were still just women's problems. Doctors back then, sporting powdered wigs and serious faces, started writing about the nervous system. They even coined a fancy name for women like her, the worriers. Sounds polite, even elegant. But behind that label was the same old belief women are emotionally fragile, mentally weak, and biologically prone to breaking down. Luckily, the womb stopped moving, but now doctors said women had too much worry, too much stimulation, too much imagination. Basically, the Enlightenment thought women were just over the top. If you cried too much or got overwhelmed or had panic attacks, you might be prescribed rest, warm baths, gentle walks, or the crowd favorite, laudanum, a little cocktail of booze and opium. Laudanum could soothe anxiety, pain, and maybe your heartbeat, but at least you'd stop complaining. For wealthier women, there were high-stress retreats where servants waited on them while gently advising no reading, no thinking, and no talking about anything as messy as your own feelings. Poor women couldn't afford sedatives. They just endured, and if you dared show anger, frustration, or heaven forbid, ambition, you might be considered not just anxious, but unstable, dangerous, crazy. Your husband could lock you up. No trial, no explanation, just a signature and silence. Welcome to the Enlightenment. Men's reason, women's sedation, philosophers' public speeches, housewives' private despair, libraries built on logic, and the terror of locked doors. So while the world basked in the light of discovery, anxious women sat quietly in the dark, drugged, misunderstood, and told their pain was just a fleeting nervous twitch. Nothing to worry about. Just breathe and don't think too much. Now, we drift into the 19th century, the Victorian era, where everything looks classy on the surface, tight corsets, tighter manners, and showing emotion, especially for women, was downright rude. Anxiety didn't disappear. It just got a new name. Welcome to the era of The cure was rest, developed by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, a man with a fine mustache and questionable sympathy. This was the go-to prescription for women diagnosed with what they charmingly called nervous disorders, feeling anxious, exhausted, and downright depressed. The cure bed rest. Weeks, sometimes months, no reading, no writing, no visitors, and definitely no talking about your feelings. Just a fancy room, heavy curtains, boiled milk, and that creeping sense that you might be losing your mind ironically. Thanks to the treatment itself, women were expected to surrender in silence, slipping into passive submission, the real rebellion. Having thoughts, dangerous stuff, resist, and you'd be labeled as resisting your own healing, which means more confinement. This wasn't some fringe therapy. It was widely respected. The famous writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman went through it herself and then wrote The Yellow Wallpaper, a creepy tale about a woman driven insane by forced silence. Spoiler, it wasn't the wallpaper messing with her head. It was a polite cage padded with oblivion. And then came the asylums. If your anxiety didn't chill out after milk and naps, you might find yourself behind the cold stone walls of a nursing home. Inside, women endured ice baths, shock therapy, and constant surveillance. Some got morphine shots. Others were locked up for days on end. Their crimes crying too much, talking too fast, refusing to smile, but nobody asked why. No one asked if she ever lost a child, suffered abuse, or simply cracked under the crushing weight of perfection. In Victorian times, women were supposed to be calm, composed, and gentle. If not, they'd be quietly hidden away, beautifully, silently, tragically, because society wasn't built for anxious women. It was built to keep them from ruining dinner parties. Welcome to the early 1900s, corsets tightening, industry booming, and a man named Sigmund Freud with a weird hobby of blaming childhood or dad for pretty much everything. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, came up with a revolutionary idea. Maybe women weren't possessed or had wonky wombs. Maybe it was the mind, the subconscious, repressed desires, unresolved issues. That must have been a breakthrough, right? And in some ways, it was. Instead of dunking anxious women in cold water or dosing them with opium, doctors now invited them to lie on a couch and talk. So cutting edge. But before you pops the champagne, let's talk about how they were expected to talk. Freud and his followers usually saw female anxiety as repressed sexual desire or inner guilt, often focused on their parents. If you felt anxious, maybe you were hiding some scandalous secret. You just didn't know it yet. Afraid to leave the house. Symbolic much. Frequent nightmares. Probably some kind of metaphor for your mom. Panic attacks. Definitely Freud stuff. Maybe involving a penis, though this new therapy was less physically violent. It still came with a classy brand of blame. The problem was inside you, not your circumstances, not trauma, not the suffocating expectations on your shoulders. You just needed to open that box. And if you didn't get better, maybe you just weren't trying hard enough. Maybe you were resisting the truth. Psychoanalysis spread fast among the intellectual elite. In smoky rooms, doctors scribbled notes while women whispered about dreams and fears, still trying to be taken seriously, still trying to be heard. Turning point. A moment of progress? And in a way, sure, it was. Instead of dunking anxious women in cold water or dosing them with opium, docs now invited them to lie on couches and talk it out. Revolutionary, right. But before you pop the champagne, let's talk about how they were expected to talk. Freud and his crew usually saw women's anxiety as the result of repressed sexual desires or inner guilt, usually aimed at their parents. Feeling anxious must be hiding some juicy secret you don't even know about yet. Afraid to leave the house, classic symbolism, nightmares, probably about your mom, panic attacks, definitely something Freudian, maybe a penis. While this new treatment was less physically violent, it still came with a fancy form of blame. The problem was inside you, not your circumstances, not trauma, not the crushing expectations piled on your shoulders. You just needed to open up. And if you didn't get better, well, maybe you just weren't trying hard enough. Maybe you were resisting the truth. Psychoanalysis spread fast among the elite intellectuals. In the smoky rooms, doctors scribbled notes while women whispered about their dreams and fears, still trying to be taken seriously, still trying to be heard. Sure, progress was made, but it was fragile progress, because even though the cages were swapped for couches, women's anxiety, it's not your situation, not your trauma, not the suffocating expectations crushing your shoulders. You just need to open the box. And if you're not better yet, maybe you just haven't tried hard enough, or maybe you're fighting the truth. Psychoanalysis spread like wildfire among the fancy intellectual crowd. In smoky rooms, doctors scribbled notes quickly, while women whispered about their dreams and fears, desperately trying to be taken seriously, trying to be heard. Sure, there was progress, but it was fragile progress, because even though cages got swapped out for sofas, women's worries were still explained through a man's lens, usually just sexual desire, longing, or daddy issues. And the question remained, can a woman just be anxious without being labeled weak, or is every tremble, every tear, every silent cry stuck with a theory instead of reality? Now it's the 1950s. The war's over. Lawns are trimmed, and your stew's expected on the table by 6. You're a suburban woman, nails polished, smile bright, pearls around your neck and your anxiety. All right, honey, that's not something we talk about, because, according to glossy magazines and daytime radio, everything's fine. So why do you want to? Screaming, enter mommy's little helper, the nickname for a tiny pill with big promises calmness, especially Valium, and the predecessor, Milltown. These little tranquilizers were marketed straight to women, especially housewives overwhelmed, underappreciated, or quietly drowning in a sea of identical Tupperware containers, feeling sad, anxious, paralyzed. Just pop a pill, honey, and flash a smile at the neighbors. Doctors handed these out like candy. No one asked about trauma. No one asked about loneliness. No one wondered if wearing high heels while vacuuming all day and pretending everything's perfect might be kinda soul-crushing, because in this new world of compliance and consumerism, a woman's role was to be content, and if she wasn't, well, clearly something was wrong with her, not the role, not the expectations, not the endless isolation. Pharma companies spun this story with an almost creepy enthusiasm. One tranquilizer ad showed a woman gripping the sink with the tagline, "You can't rescue her, but you can help her feel less stuck." Another proudly promised peace of mind for busy housewives, you know, those glue-holding families together with a smile and an ever-increasing dose of benzodiazepines. By the 1960s, millions of women were on these drugs, not because they were mentally ill, but because they were exhausted, sad, and clueless why. Because they were humans trapped in a culture that wouldn't let them be. Sure, these drugs dulled the pain temporarily, but often led to long-term addiction. But nobody talked about that. After all, addiction wasn't exactly a ladylike problem, so they smiled, they swallowed hard, and somewhere deep under the sedation, the real question lingered. What if her anxiety wasn't a disorder? What if it was a warning, a silent scream from a soul never allowed to speak? By the 1970s, things started to change. The stew pot was still warm, the house still clean, but inside, the woman was bursting with questions like, why am I the only one taking tranquilizers? Why does my pain come with a prescription instead of a conversation? And who decided I should apologize for being anxious? The feminist movement spread not out of anger, but clarity. Women began speaking up in awareness groups across living rooms and campuses. They swapped notes and realized they were not alone. They understood anxiety wasn't a personal flaw. It wasn't just hormones or hysteria. It was often the inevitable result of overwork, being unheard, and expected to act like emotional furniture. Books like Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique cracked open the shiny surface of post-war family life, exposing an unnamed problem. It described women feeling empty, anxious, restless, even when they had everything society told them to want. Finally, someone said, "It's not in your head, it's in the walls, in the expectations, in the silence." And once that silence broke, there was no going back. Women started reclaiming their story. They stopped accepting tranquilizers as an apology. They began questioning the institutions that had hurt their emotions for centuries. In therapy rooms, a new kind of counselor appeared, someone who actually listened, someone who didn't chalk every panic attack up to marriage or motherhood meltdowns. Women entered psychology, medicine, and psychiatry not just as patients, but as experts. It wasn't perfect. Misdiagnoses were still common. Stigma still lingered. And pharma companies were still busy. But one big thing changed. Women speak up, and this time, nobody cuts them off. They're connecting the dots between personal pain and social pressure, inner struggle, and outside structure. They're rewriting the story from what's wrong with me to what happened to me, and slowly, painfully, the world begins to change, because when women stop being silent and start comparing notes, they discover something revolutionary. Their anxiety isn't crazy, It's real, trying to find a voice in a world that never wanted to hear it. As the 80s and 90s roll by, it was real, trying to find a voice in a world that never wanted to hear it. As the 80s and 90s rolled by, women's anxiety finally got a proper name. Not just hysterics or she's just tired, but real diagnostic terms. Generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, PTSD, finally, a medical label that didn't blame the uterus. Progress. Well, sort of. Psychiatry got more precise. The DSM, that giant mental health label catalog, kept getting thicker, and insurance companies started paying up. But even as science evolved, a woman's anxiety still came wrapped in familiar echoes of doubt, dismissal, and stigma. Imagine you're a woman in 1993 having a panic attack. Your heart's pounding, palms sweaty, scared you're about to die. Doc might hand you a flyer, a Xanax prescription, and a polite suggestion to rest, at least. They stopped blaming your uterus. Now they blamed your lifestyle. You're working too hard. Maybe you're just overwhelmed. Ever tried jogging? Sure, therapy's an option if you can afford it. But finding a therapist who doesn't think your anxiety is just a phase can still be a nightmare. Cry in therapy. You're weak. Don't cry, probably denying it. Either way, your diagnosis comes with an asterisk. Still, for many women, finally naming these feelings was like getting a mirror after years in the dark. It's not weakness, not a personal failure. It's real, and it's been around forever. Meds got better too. SSRIs like Prozac and Zoloft became household names, touted as modern fixes for modern problems. And for many, they actually helped. But again, they often came without a full explanation, no deep dive into trauma, history, or generational patterns. Just try it, feel better. So yeah, progress was clinical, not compassionate, structured, not sensitive, new names. But the loneliness still stung, familiar, because even with labels, pills, and pamphlets, the silent question lingered. Has anyone ever asked why I'm scared? Welcome to the 2000s, when flip phones were cool again. Low-rise jeans made no sense, and for the first time in centuries, people started asking not just what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. It was a quiet revolution. No banners, no protests, just TED Talks, memoirs, and clinical chats slowly shifting the narrative. Researchers, therapists, and trauma survivors began connecting the long-ignored dots. Anxiety wasn't just a chemical imbalance or a random quirk. Sometimes it was a normal reaction to a not-so-great life. Suddenly, 3 words stood out: trauma-informed care, instead of treating anxiety as a personal flaw. This approach asked bigger questions. What experiences shaped your nervous system? What patterns is your body trying to survive? What if your hypervigilance isn't crazy, but learned? This isn't just academic, it's deeply personal, especially for women, because now anxiety could be traced back to things no one wanted to talk about: abuse, neglect, generational pressure, workplace harassment, the emotional burden of pretending to have it all together while quietly suffering. For many, this brought relief. Heck, recognition. For the first time, their fear wasn't a flaw, it was a wound. And wounds can heal, but this isn't a loneliness still stings. Familiar. Because even with names, pills, and pamphlets, the question still lingers in the silence. Has anyone ever asked why I'm scared? Welcome to the 2000s. When flip phones got cool, low-rise jeans made no sense. And for the first time in centuries, people started asking not just what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. It's a quiet revolution. No banners or protests, but TED Talks, memoirs, and clinical conversations gradually changing things. Researchers, therapists, and trauma survivors start connecting dots that were long ignored. Anxiety isn't just a chemical imbalance or some random habit. Sometimes it's a normal reaction to a not-so-great life. And suddenly, 3 words start to stand out: trauma-informed care. Instead of treating anxiety like a personal flaw, this approach asks bigger questions. What experiences shaped your nervous system? What patterns is your body trying to survive? What if your hypervigilance isn't irrational, but learned? This isn't just academic, it's deeply personal, especially for women, because now anxiety can be traced back to things no one wants to talk about: abuse, neglect, generational pressure, workplace harassment, emotional burdens of having to be perfect while secretly suffering. For many, this brings relief, even recognition. For the first time, their fear isn't a flaw, it's a wound. And wounds can heal, but this isn't a magic cure. Society still loves productivity more than peace. Women still face pressure to be calm, competent, and composed, even while juggling family, careers, kids, and a bunch of fancy mental health buzzwords. Burnout, imposter syndrome, high-functioning anxiety terms that sound new but often feel old. And even though therapy is more accessible, it's still pricey, inconsistent. Still, quoting productivity experts, it's simply rest. Rest as resistance, rest as reclaiming, rest as a long band medicine that inconsistent. One therapist might keep you coming back. Another might just give you unwanted advice and a fake smile. Social media, both a helper and a hurt. Women now can openly share their struggles, building solidarity across time zones, but also get told to just drink more water and meditate instead of tackling years of systemic trauma. Still, something's shifting because finally, the world's starting to get what women have always known. That anxiety, it's not weakness. It's history whispering through the body, waiting for anyone to listen. Now we live in the age of Wi-Fi, health influencers, and phones that never let you rest. Welcome to the digital era, where women's anxiety doesn't need a doctor's diagnosis. It just needs a screen. You wake up to 37 notifications, 4 emails, 2 calendar alerts, and a message from someone just checking in. You haven't even had coffee, but your heart's already pounding. Digital anxiety isn't just internal, it's interactive and non-stop. You're expected to be always on, reply fast, be successful, hydrated, emotionally balanced, and best of all, glowing, all while keeping a carefully curated smile on a platform that calls itself social media. The modern woman doesn't just manage her life, she manages her brand, and somehow, anxiety is both a warning sign and a fashion statement. Posts like "Today I'm a mess" can trend, as long as they come with the right filter and a self-aware but not too messy caption. Vulnerability sells, but only if it's digestible, and if you try to disconnect good luck, the world doesn't slow down. The algorithm punishes you. Emails pile up like guilt. Even meditation becomes a performance, tracked by an app and rated by your smartwatch. Anxiety is everywhere, but so are the tips. You can scroll through clips promising to heal your nervous system in under 30 seconds. Breathing exercises, matcha, journaling, typing away, all great tools until they turn into just another checkbox on your overloaded to-do list. And through it all, the root of women's anxiety stubbornly stays the same: pressure. Pressure to be liked, to succeed, to be informed, to respond, to be healthy, slim, ethical, kind, efficient, creative, funny but not too much. And don't forget to reply to your boss, your bestie, and the 24/7 mom chat. No wonder your chest feels tight, because in a 24/7 world, resting feels radical, silence feels suspicious, and peace, that's a full-time job. But here's the quiet truth. Your anxiety isn't a glitch. It's a signal. Your nervous system wasn't built to handle this much noise. After centuries of being silenced, anesthetized, shamed, and then dragged into burnout, a surprise is happening. Women are slowing down, not because the world loosened its grip. Nope. But because many have realized the rat race to impossible standards only ends one-way burnout with a side of existential dread. So now, in internet corners and quiet living rooms, in yoga studios and therapy sessions, a gentle revolution is brewing. It's not loud. It's not viral. It doesn't wear matching workout gear or, quote, productivity gurus. It's simply rest. Rest as resistance. Rest as reclamation. Rest as a long forbidden medicine that, quoting productivity experts, it's basically just resting. Resting as a form of rebellion. Resting as a way to take back control. Resting like a long-banned drug that women have been denied for centuries. Not the forced meds prescribed by Victorian doctors, but the kind you choose yourself. The kind that says, "I don't owe anyone my burnout." Women are learning to say no, not like losers, but like setting a boundary. They cancel plans, log off, let the dishes pile up in the sink, and shockingly, the world keeps spinning. It's not easy. That guilt's still whispering you should do more. But now, there's another voice rising up. A softer one. You've done enough today. Breathe. Communities started forming around this truth. Groups of women carving out space for each other without judgment. Who says I'm the same? Instead of why can't you get? Over it, they're rewriting the story. One breath at a time. They're learning that healing isn't a straight line. Some days you meditate, journal, and take walks. Other days you crane into your cereal bowl and erase your calendar. Both are fine. And maybe, just maybe, Anxiety doesn't mean you're breaking. Maybe it means you're waking up in a world trying to numb you. So tonight, if your mind's racing or your heart feels heavy, remember this. You're not a machine. You were never made to be one. And in a culture worshiping hustle and productivity, choosing real rest isn't weakness. It's ancient, sacred, rebellious wisdom. Long before selfies, sailor sleeves, or regrettable lower back tattoos, people were getting inked. Actually, the earliest tattoos we know of weren't rebellious teens or battle-scarred warriors. They belonged to a dude frozen in time. Literally, the Iceman, found in the Alps in 1991, was over 5,000 years old. His body, preserved by snow, time, and luck, was etched with 61 tattoos, simple black lines and crosses, no skulls, no dragons, just lines. But here's the thing, those lines weren't random. They were placed on joints, the spine, and ankles. Modern researchers think they might be an early form of acupuncture or pain relief, an ancient mashup of medicine and ritual carved into skin with soot and sharp tools. Primitive, sure, but intentional. These tattoos weren't for show. They were survival tattoos. A Nazi wasn't the only case. Across ancient Egypt, mummies mostly, women were found tattooed with intricate dot patterns on their bodies, human bodies. Some archaeologists believe they symbolized fertility, used to protect mother and child during childbirth. Others say they were signs of devotion to the goddess Hathor. Either way, these weren't decorations. They were spiritual, protective, worn proudly into the afterlife. In Siberia, tattooed Scythian nobles were buried in icy tombs, their bodies adorned with mythical beasts, deer, leopards, unicorns wrapping arms and torsos in bold black ink. For these folks, tattoos meant warrior status, a passport to the afterlife, and maybe a status symbol. They weren't the first tattooed humans, just the earliest we've found, and that's the silent truth of tattoo history. It didn't start with pop culture. It began with ritual, pain, and purpose. Tattoos were never just about looking good. They were medicine, memory, protection. Long before ink was rebellion, it was reverence, a sacred thread weaving through skin, to tell stories before books existed, to mark meaning before we had names for everything. So next time you see a simple ink line, remember someone did that thousands of years ago with fire and ash, and it meant something huge. To understand the soul of tattoos, we have to drift across oceans to Polynesian islands, where ink isn't fashion, it's ritual. Places like Samoa, Tonga, and Tahiti. Tattoos aren't a whim. They're sacred, made and worn for life. The word tatau comes from the Polynesian tatau, meaning to strike, referring to the sound made when a bone tool taps ink into skin. This isn't a machine, it's rhythm. Tatau isn't just body art, it's a ritual, often painful, but always deeply meaningful. A young Samoan guy lies on a woven mat, while a tattoo artist, or tufuga, works daily. Samoa, Tonga and Tahiti tattoos weren't just random impulse buys. They were sacred, crafted, and worn for life. The word tatau comes from Polynesian tatau, meaning to strike, nodding to the sound when bone tools tap ink into skin. This isn't some machine buzzing away. It's a rhythm. Tatau isn't just body art. It's a ritual, often painful, but always deeply meaningful. A young Samoan guy lies on a woven mat while the tattoo master, or tufaga, works daily, sometimes for weeks, using sharp bones and soot to tap complex geometric patterns onto his body. The tattoos stretch from waist to knees, symbols of maturity, identity, and courage. The pain isn't random, it's part of the ceremony. Enduring it means you're ready. Quitting halfway brings shame not just on you, but your whole family. In Tahiti, tattoos represent genealogy and status. They could show sacred protection, spiritual connection, or sexual maturity. A woman's finger tattoo might say, "I'm ready to marry." A man's chest could shout out his warrior lineage. Every dot, line, and curve was sacred, even today. In many Polynesian communities, tattoos still pack that punch. They're not just self-expression. They're a link to ancestors, a living scroll inked on skin. When Europeans first hit the Pacific in the 18th century, they were both fascinated and horrified. Sailors like Captain Cook wrote about these customs in their journals, and soon his crew started tattooing themselves not for ritual, but to mark the trip, a souvenir, a trend, stripped of meaning but still inked. Still, the origin stayed pure. Polynesian tattoos were never a casual thing. They were sacred, personal, and proudly passed down through generations. Proof that your story was worth the pain and permanent enough to live right under your skin. Moving east, the tattoo story gets messier beauty and punishment, honor and shame, all carved into flesh. In ancient China, tattoos came with heavy stigma instead of signs of spirituality or power. They were marks of shame. Criminals had words like thief or traitor tattooed on their face or neck, a permanent public reminder of what they did and the person they'd never stop being. This was called the cheap brand for exile. Your sentence didn't end with prison. You wore it on your skin for life. Yet even in this shameful darkness, tattoos had deeper layers. Some Chinese warriors voluntarily inked themselves to show loyalty to brothers or dedication to an ideal. In the legendary novel Water Margin, one of the 108 outlaw heroes supposedly had his whole body tattooed with dragons, tigers, and fire. A man's honor was written on his skin like a sacred scripture. In Japan, the story is just as layered, maybe more. Early Japanese tattoos, called irizumi, were meant to ward off evil spirits, protect fishermen, or even symbolize status. But like China, tattoos also became punishment. Criminals were marked with lines on their arms or symbols on their foreheads. In some places, each crime added a stroke, a visible mark of shame everyone could see. But over time, things shifted. By the Edo period, the 1600s to 1800s, full-body tattoos rose as an underground art form. Vibrant, intricate designs, dragons, koi fish, gods, demons spread across the backs, arms, and legs of common folk. These weren't criminals. They were firefighters, workers, gamblers, men with dangerous jobs and reputations even riskier. Then came the Yakuza, Japan's scary crime syndicates, who embraced full-body Irizumi as symbols of power, loyalty, and courage. The more ink, the more respect, and the more pain you had to endure. These tattoos weren't for public show. They were private, hidden under clothes, only revealed in baths or battles. In both China and Japan, tattoos lived in tension art and punishment, identity and exile, a constant dance between pride and shame, because sometimes the ink on your skin defines who you are. In ancient Europe, tattoos walked a fine line between power and punishment, depending entirely on who was doing the inking and who was wearing the mark. Let's start with the Celts and the Picts, tribes living where modern England and Scotland are now. They define you. In ancient Europe, tattoos walked a thin line between power and punishment, depending entirely on who wielded the needle and who wore the mark. Let's start with the Celts and Picts, tribes from what's now England and Scotland, when Roman soldiers first met them. They were stunned. These warriors, some naked, some in wolf pelts, were covered in swirling blue tattoos, fierce spirals, and knots carved into their faces and bodies. The dye was plant-based, coloring skin deep blue, like storm clouds rolling over flesh. These weren't decorations. They were battle armor, threats, identity. Tattooing was a statement. I'm not scared of blood. Julius Caesar described them in his works, half amazed, half horrified, calling them wild and barbaric. Funny, considering what the Romans did next, because while Romans bragged about law and order, they also used tattoos not as badges of honor, but as tools of control. Criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war were marked with signs of ownership or shame. A runaway slave could be branded with the letters FVG, short for fugitivus. A deserter from the legion got a permanent scarlet letter tattoo. Even early Roman Christians sometimes got tattooed to mark them as enemies of the state or, worse, heretics. Not a badge of honor, more like a scarlet letter of shame. But not all Roman tattoos were punishments. Some soldiers, especially in the eastern provinces, started volunteering for tattoos, symbols of loyalty to their legion or devotion to a god, a quiet rebellion inked beneath their armor. Over time, as Christianity spread and took power, tattooing across Europe lost its street cred. By early Middle Ages, it was mostly condemned as pagan, sinful, or barbaric. The body was now seen as a temple, and temples are apparently best left unpainted, but deep in forests and misty meadows. Ancient traditions hung on, passed down through generations, from mother to daughter, warrior to warrior. Because, long before ink was a crime, it was tribal, and on the blood-soaked lands of ancient Europe, tattoos proved you belonged to your people, your land, your gods. As Europe stepped into the Middle Ages, tattoos faded, but never disappeared. They just slipped into the shadows. The Christian church, now the continental boss, condemned tattoos. The body had to stay pure, spotless, a holy vessel. Pagan customs, including tattoos, were pushed aside, labeled heretical, rebellious, or worse, demonic. Still, even in this era of repression, tattoo ink found its way under the skin among Christian pilgrims, especially those who made the grueling trek to Jerusalem. Tattoos became symbols of devotion. A tiny cross tattooed on a wrist or forearm was proof. I made it. You survived the seas, deserts, robbers, and you came back with a mark of faith. Some pilgrims even got these tattoos while in the Holy Land, inked by Coptic Christian families who preserved this sacred art through generations. These weren't just for looks. They were spiritual contracts, reminders etched in flesh that said, I belong to God, and I've been to his city. In some monasteries, tattoos were used to identify members of certain sects, hidden, discreet symbols, with purpose, rumors, though rarely confirmed, tell of knights in the Crusades tattooing relics, saints, or sacred words on their arms and chests before battle. If they died far from home, at least their bodies bore the mark of heaven. Meanwhile, outside church walls, folk traditions held strong. In remote villages and mountain forests, old customs survived. Women tattooed protective symbols on their arms during childbirth. Shepherds painted sacred patterns to ward off wolves. These weren't fashion statements. They were prayers in pigment. But still, tattooing in medieval Europe was seen as hanging on society's fringe, spiritually suspect, socially scrutinized, unless you were forcibly branded criminals, prisoners, slaves. All could be marked, and in those cases, tattoos weren't a choice. They were a sentence. So, the Middle Ages became a paradox, an era where ink was both banned and revered, both sacred and shameful, a time when tattoos flew under the radar, whispers of faith, defiance, and humans just can't help but leave their mark, even when the world's basically screaming, don't do that. When European sails started cutting across oceans in the 16th and 17th centuries, tattoos made a comeback in the West, not through science or religion, but through salt water and superstition. Explorers like Captain James Cook weren't just mapping coastlines. They ran into cultures that treated tattoos like sacred art, especially in Polynesia. Cook's sailors, totally mesmerized by the bold designs and meanings, started getting inked themselves. It was weird, risky, and rebellious. Everything on the ship was coveted by sailors. From there, tattoos spread through ports like spilled rum. Sailors built their own tattoo culture, part survival, part tradition, part showing off. An anchor on your forearm meant you'd crossed the Atlantic. A turtle. You'd crossed the equator and officially became a shellback. A pig and a rooster on your leg. That was a charm against drowning because, oddly enough, those animals were often the only survivors of shipwrecks, floating safely in wooden barrels. Every tattoo had meaning, although meanings tended to change over time. A dagger through the heart could mean lost love or just a rough night in some Caribbean bar. clenched knuckles, a prayer for grip, not on life, but on wet rigging in choppy seas. Tattoos became the unofficial language of sailors. No matter your flag, native tongue, or lucky rum brand, ink could tell your story. It was the common identity out on lonely oceans. Port cities like New York, London, and Lisbon, tattoo shops started popping up. Smoky little rooms filled with jars of ink imported from faraway lands. These weren't temple artists. They were sailors themselves, often using homemade needles and gunpowder soot, but for men facing drowning, disease, and mutiny, a bit of pain to make a permanent mark didn't seem so bad. Tattoos became keepsakes, confessions, maps of places you'd been, and parts of yourself you couldn't leave behind, in an era when most people's stories faded with time. Sailors wrote theirs in ink and let the sea turn them into legends. By the late 19th century, tattoos were no longer just sailor or outsider badges. Thanks to actual sparks, literally tattoos, stepped into the modern world. In 1891, Samuel O'Reilly, a New York tattoo artist, patented the first electric tattoo machine, inspired by Thomas Edison's electric pen. O'Reilly's device made tattooing faster, more precise, and less bloody. Suddenly, tattoos could be done in hours instead of days. The pain was still there, but now it felt more like art than surgery. And with that came a new era tattoos as performance, circus shows, and dime museums started showcasing tattooed men and women as curiosities. There was Captain George Constantinus, the Greek prince covered head to toe in intricate Eastern designs, and Nora Hildebrandt, one of America's first tattooed ladies, whose ink came with a dramatic and probably made-up story about being captured and forced to tattoo by a savage tribe. These performers weren't just oddballs. They were living exhibitions. Their bodies became moving stories, drawing crowds and challenging Victorian ideas of decency, especially when a woman rolled up her sleeve to reveal a snake coiled around her shoulder. Still, tattoos were taboo in polite society. If you had ink, it meant something. You'd been to war, sailed the seas, done time, or run away with the circus. But behind closed doors, the upper crust were quietly getting inked too. Rumor has it, King Edward VII and his son, future King George V, both had tattoos, a snake coiled around the shoulder. Yet tattoos remained taboo in polite society. If you had ink, it meant something, something wild. You'd been to war, to sea, to prison, or run away with the circus. But behind closed doors, the upper class were secretly getting inked too. Rumor has it King Edward VII and his son, future King George V, both had tattoos, one with a Jerusalem cross, the other with a dragon carved in Japan. European nobles and even some American elites began quietly exploring body art's novelty, always ready to deny it with a straight face. Tattoo shops thrived in port cities, and now started popping up in urban centers too. Tiny studios squeezed between barbershops and pool halls. Most artists were men, but the scene was growing. Women started jumping in too. Needle in hand, ink was spreading. No longer just a rebel's badge, it became a way to preserve memories, identity, or just the thrill of wearing something nobody could snatch away. As the 20th century marched on with skyscrapers, revolutions, and wars, tattoos kept growing quietly, often unnoticed, behind prison walls, in locked cells and concrete yards. A new ink language was being written, not on paper, but on skin. These weren't polished studio tattoos. They were homemade, rough, crafted from smuggled needles, guitar strings, melted plastic, and ink mixed from soot and toothpaste. Painful, oh, absolutely. Precise, rare, meaningful, always. In prisons worldwide, from Russia's gulags to American penitentiaries. Tattoos became secret codes. Every image told a story. Every spot had meaning, like a spider web on the elbow, marking time served, a teardrop near the eye, a lost life or a life taken. 5 dots on the hand, 4 corners, and a center dot meant I'm surrounded. In Soviet prisons, tattoos became a detailed system of status and survival. A church tattoo on the chest, years behind bars. Each dome meant a sentence served. A star on the shoulder, a high-ranking inmate not to be messed with. But faking ranks with ink could get you killed. These tattoos weren't just decoration. They were armor, resumes, warnings, prayers. In the U.S., prisoner tattoos meant similar things: gang ties, racial lines, territorial claims, personal losses. Tattoo guns were often shared tools. Ink passed between inmates like contraband communion wafers. For many, their first tattoo wasn't a choice. It was a rite of passage. But even outside the walls, these prison-born styles started bleeding into the wider world. Artists, especially in urban areas, began mixing bold, sharp prison art lines into their own work. What started as survival behind bars became a style copied in shops, immortalized in films, echoed in street culture, yet stigma stuck around. Visible tattoo, especially on hands, neck, or face, often meant closed doors, judgment, suspicion. Ink fades, but assumptions don't. But for those wearing them, those scars aren't shameful. They're survival stories, time lived, identity etched in silence, because sometimes, when no one's listening, the skin speaks. By the early 21st century, tattoos underwent their biggest makeover ever, from ancient outlaw marks to something else entirely. A self-portrait. Things once hidden under sleeves or whispered about were now proudly displayed on runways, boardrooms, and social media feeds. From bartenders to CEOs, preschool teachers to veterans, ink stopped being a rebel symbol. It became a statement of identity. The rise of tattoo shops reflects this shift. No more dingy little spots with flickering neon signs. Many have become shrines to self-expression, clean, tightly run, often looking more like art galleries than the shabby dens of old. Tattoo artists became celebs with portfolios, heavy client lists, and fans flying in from other countries just to sit in their chairs. Styles exploded: watercolor tattoos, Minimalist fine lines, photorealistic sharpness, sacred geometry, cultural revivals, portraits, pets, loved ones, even life stories rendered in detail. Technology helped. Machines got quieter, needles sharper, ink safer, and healed faster. Pets, loved ones, even life stories laid out in detail. Technology helped. Machines got quieter, needles got sharper, ink became safer, and healed faster. But beneath the aesthetic beauty, the old reasons still linger. People still come to buy what they've always bought: memories, mourning, power, rebirth. Some tattoos mark big milestones: birth, loss, new beginnings. Others cover scars, both the visible and the hidden kind. Some get inked after escaping abusive relationships. Some honor revered ancestors. Some write their survival in symbols they can't even read aloud. And yeah, some people are making a proud comeback. The Moritamoko, the Inuit, leather stitching art, the Bach art of the Philippines once looked down on or even banned are being revived by new generations, reconnecting with their roots through line art. But of course, there's still plenty of debate about cultural appropriation, about over-commercialization, and whether something sacred can survive once it's trendy. But maybe that's the beauty of it. Tattoos have always lived in tension between pain and pride, permanence and impermanence, who we are and who we want to be. So, we circle back to where we started. Ink in the skin is a silent story, a mark not for approval, but to prove a truth. And in the ancient quiet language of tattoo art, that's always enough. The story of the space race didn't start with a spaceship or a wild dream. It started with war. World War II ravaged this planet, cities leveled, borders redrawn, and two superpowers stood on opposite sides of a new world order. The US and the USSR, once awkward allies, now locked horns as ideological opponents: capitalism versus communism, democracy versus dictatorship. And in the ashes of Nazi Germany, both sides found something, or rather, someone they wanted: Werner von Braun, the German engineer behind the deadly V-2 rocket, was captured by the Americans and quietly whisked away in Operations Paperclip. Not to be outdone, the Soviets grabbed German scientists and their research too. The spoils of war now included rocket fuel, blueprints, and the bombs to make rockets fly. The Cold War didn't start with gunfire, but with silence and suspicion. Each side raced not just to build bombs, but also bomb delivery systems. Intercontinental ballistic missiles, or ICBMs, became the new power symbol. Missiles capable of carrying nuclear warheads from one continent to another. But soon, someone asked a different question. What if we aimed these bad boys at the stars instead? Space became the next frontier, not for exploration, but domination. It wasn't just science, it was symbolism. Whoever got there first would claim moral high ground, superior tech, and global street cred. For the Soviets, the challenge was personal. After years of destruction and isolation, space was their shot to show off strength to the world and themselves. In the U.S., Space became about national pride and strategic necessity. Losing wasn't just failure, it was a threat. So both nations looked up at the sky, not with wonder, but with urgency. Rockets were no longer just weapons, they were ladders to fame, and somewhere above Earth's atmosphere, a silent race began. A race between machines and humans, a race where the finish line wasn't a place but a dream. On a clear night, October 4th, 1957, the world changed. Not with a bang but a beep. From a dusty launch site in Kazakhstan, the Soviets sent a tiny metal ball into orbit. It was called Sputnik 1, a shiny aluminum ball no bigger than a beach ball, weighing less than 200 pounds, with 4 long antennas sticking out from its sides. No cameras, no passengers, just a radio transmitter sending out a steady beep as it circled Earth every 96 minutes. But those beeps echoed like thunder to the Soviets. Sputnik was proof of their victory, the first human-made satellite in space, the first object created by humans to break free from Earth's gravity. It was an engineering marvel, tiny metal ball launched into orbit. It was called Sputnik 1, a shiny aluminum ball no bigger than a beach ball, weighing less than 200 pounds, with 4 long antennas sticking out the sides. No camera, no passengers, just a radio transmitter sending out a steady beep as it orbited Earth every 96 minutes. But those beeps echoed like thunder to the Soviets. Sputnik was proof of victory, the first human-made satellite launched into space, the first thing humans built that could escape Earth's gravity, a stunning engineering feat. It meant their rockets worked. It meant they were ahead to Americans. It was a shiny aluminum wake-up call. Panic spread across the U.S. If the Soviets could launch a satellite, what else? Space. Oh yeah, they could also lob nuclear warheads across oceans. Schools ran hide-and-seek drills. Headlines screamed about a new red moon. And in living rooms across the country, everyone looked up and wondered, are they watching us? Sputnik wasn't just a satellite. It was a message. It told the world the Soviets had grabbed the lead in space and turned the cosmos into a playground for bragging rights, politics, and pure paranoia. President Eisenhower tried to stay calm, insisting the U.S. wasn't falling behind, but backstage, alarm bells were ringing. Funding for science programs shot through the roof. Congress scrambled to create NASA. American kids suddenly got pushed to study math and physics, not just to land decent jobs, but to defend freedom itself. Within a month, the Soviets launched Sputnik 2 carrying a passenger named Laika, a stray dog picked up off Moscow's streets. Laika became the first living creature to orbit Earth. Spoiler? She didn't survive the trip, but the message was crystal clear. The Soviets weren't just one step ahead. They were flooring the gas, and for the first time ever, humanity wasn't alone out there among the stars. We'd sent something, someone up there, and the real race had officially begun. The Sputnik shock hit hard in living rooms, labs, classrooms, and Capitol Hill. The U.S. faced a brutal truth. It had been blasted into space not by a stronger superpower, but by a country that was until recently a wartime ally, now a fierce, ideological rival. The question wasn't just how they did it. The real question was, what were we going to do now? The answer came fast. In 1958, the U.S. founded a new agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, built from the wreckage of earlier aerospace programs. NASA wasn't just some agency. It was a statement, a promise that America's wouldn't just catch up but lead the pack. But America's first satellite, Explorer 1, didn't launch until January 31st, 1958, almost 4 months after Sputnik. Still, it carried more than just beeps. It discovered the Van Allen radiation belts, proving America wasn't just chasing it, was contributing to science. The space race became a national mission. Kids' TV shows started featuring space science. Schools added rocket math to the curriculum. Funding for science, tech, and math skyrocketed. American identity got tangled up with space, but politics was always driving the show. This wasn't just curiosity. It was about Cold War domination. Space was the new frontier. Whoever controlled it would control communications, defense, and prestige. The U.S. feared looking weak, especially to newly independent countries choosing between capitalist democracy and communism. Enter Project Mercury, America's first manned space program. 7. Test pilots, later known as the Mercury 7, were picked to represent not just NASA, but the hopes of a whole nation. They trained in secret. They endured brutal physical and mental tests, and they became heroes before even leaving the ground. Meanwhile, the Soviets were gearing up to raise the stakes even higher because satellites were just the warm-up act. The next goal was clear: put a human in space and bring them home for America. This challenge wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real, personal, urgent, and only a matter of time before someone Soviet or American dared cross the invisible line between Earth and whatever was out there. On April 12th, 1961, just after sunrise, over the Kazakh desert, a sleek silver rocket stood on the launch pad, tall, silent, and ready to rewrite history. Inside was a 27-year-old Soviet pilot named Yuri Gagarin. He was calm, smiling, even wearing an orange flight suit and white helmet. He looked more like a test pilot than a pioneer. But what he was about to do had never been done before: leave Earth completely. At 9:07 a.m. Moscow time, Vostok 1 roared to life. Gagarin's voice crackled over the radio with one word echoing across the planet: Poyakali, let's go. Thanks to that, he became the first guy to fly into space. The whole trip lasted only 108 minutes. Gagarin made one orbit around Earth, reached a max height of 187 kilometers, and zipped along at over 17,000 miles per hour. He looked down and saw our planet from way up high Earth's blue curve, the blackness of space, and no borders in sight. Then he described what he saw with simple awe: Earth is blue, really beautiful, truly amazing, but don't get it twisted. This wasn't just a feel-good human achievement moment. It was a geopolitical earthquake. The Soviets did it first. Again, after Sputnik, after Laika, they sent a man into space and brought him back safe and sound. Gagarin didn't just orbit Earth. He showed up on every front page on the planet. The Soviets hailed him as a hero, a symbol of superior socialism and scientific muscle. Meanwhile, the U.S. was once again stunned and scrambling to catch up. President Kennedy, barely a few months into office, suddenly faced the pressure to match and beat the Soviet win. Yuri Gagarin came back to Earth a hero, landing in a fields and shocking a farmer and his daughter before calmly explaining he was from outer space. He never flew again, but his name was forever etched in history because that day, humanity crossed a line we'd only dreamed about. We weren't earthbound anymore. One man, one orbit, and the space race officially entered its most human chapter, just weeks after Yuri Gagarin made history. The U.S. was shocked, but not beaten. The Soviets claimed first place in manned spaceflight, but America had its own plans to catch up and eventually top Soviet achievements. America's first step was Alan Shepard. On May 5th of 1961, Shepard, a Navy test pilot, climbed into the Mercury Redstone 3 spacecraft, nicknamed Freedom 7. Shepard's mission wasn't to orbit Earth. Instead, his flight was suborbital, a short but crucial trip into space to prove the U.S. could send a person skyward and bring them back safely. The stakes were sky high. Shepard's flight lasted just 15 minutes, a brief moment in space. But it was a loud public statement. America was in the race and wasn't planning to lose. The countdown began, and at 9:34 a.m., the rocket blasted off with a roar that shook the ground. Shepard soared to 116 miles above Earth and stayed in space for just a few minutes, floating weightless. He had a stunning moment looking down at the blue planet below. No time to stare, though after a tense, short trip, Shepard's craft fell sharply and splashed down in the Atlantic Ocean. Shepard was immediately rescued by a Navy ship, and when he stepped out, he was hailed as a hero, the first American in space. Shepard's flight wasn't as long or far-reaching as Gagarin's orbit, but it was a major leap forward for the U.S. space program. It proved Americans could get humans into space, and crucially, bring them back safely. The U.S. was officially in the race, and even though it was a short flight, it was a giant leap toward the ultimate goal, the moon. Shepard's success pushed NASA into action. Mercury's first win paved the way for Gemini and Apollo. Now America was determined to go further, higher, and most importantly, reach the final frontier. The race to the moon was no longer just about rockets anymore. It was about pride, human willpower, and stakes higher than ever before. With Alan Shepard's suborbital flight and Mercury's short but groundbreaking missions, the U.S. proved it could put humans into space, But now NASA faced a bigger question. Could they go farther? Could they stay in space longer? And most importantly, could they get to the moon? Enter the Gemini program, the bridge between Mercury and Apollo missions, where key technologies and techniques to get humans to the moon were tested. Launched in 1965, the Gemini program was designed to push the limits of manned space flights. It was bigger, bolder, and way more ambitious. The Gemini spacecraft, twice the size of Mercury and carrying 2 astronauts. Gemini was the first program to break the mold of short space trips. Gemini's maiden flight. Gemini 3 blasted off on March 23, 1965, with astronauts Virgil Gus Grissom and John Young aboard. Their mission was short and sweet, just orbiting Earth, but it marked a huge milestone in human space exploration. Grissom's flight lasted only 5 hours, but it proved 2 people could survive together in space, pilot the spacecraft, and manage life support systems in orbit. Gemini missions quickly got more complex. Gemini 4 in June 1965 featured the first American spacewalk, with Ed White floating around outside for 23 minutes. This was a massive leap, showing humans could actually work outside their spaceship. Kind of important if you want to visit the moon, right? Gemini also introduced techniques like orbital rendezvous and docking, essential skills for the Apollo moon missions. The ultimate goal to prep astronauts for deep space, which meant spending days in orbit, doing tricky maneuvers, and testing their endurance for longer trips. When Gemini 12 wrapped up its final mission in November 1966, the foundation was set. America was ready to shoot for the moon, and while the Soviets still let in some areas, they weren't keeping up with the new pace. The U.S. was gearing up for its biggest challenge, yet a test not just of tech, but of human spirit. The moon race was heating up, and the finish line was in sight. Back in 1961, President John F. Kennedy, inspired by Cold War tensions and the space challenge, made a bold call that set the stage for one of humanity's greatest feats. On May 25th, he stood before Congress and declared the U.S. would put a man on the moon before the decade was out. The goal was clear, not just to send humans to space, but to get them to the moon and back safely. This vision sparked the birth of Apollo, NASA's dedicated moon exploration program. The unprecedented goal: land astronauts on the moon, touch down safely, and return home. Apollo was America's full-throttle answer to Soviet space dominance. The first step, Apollo 1, a tragic mission cut short by a deadly fire on January 27, 1967, that claimed the lives of Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee during a pre-launch test. The fire was catastrophic, but it forced NASA to rethink safety protocols and equipment. The Apollo program pushed on with grit and innovation, learning from that heartbreaking loss. In 1968, Apollo 8 became the first mission to orbit the moon. Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders were the first humans to see the moon's far side with their own eyes. The sight of Earth rising over the lunar surface from their spacecraft window captured imaginations worldwide and marked a huge milestone in our exploration journey. But the ultimate goal was still ahead. The world watched as NASA prepped for Apollo 11. This mission would turn Kennedy's dream into reality. The tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union was palpable, but America was dead set on planting its flag on the moon first. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made history when Armstrong stepped off the lunar module and onto the moon's surface. He uttered those famous words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," marking a milestone in humanity's grand adventure. But the real prize, still out there, everyone's watching NASA prep for Apollo 11. This mission was going to turn Kennedy's dream into reality. Cold War vibes between the U.S. and USSR. Oh, totally. But the U.S. was dead set on planting its flag on the moon first. July 20th, 1969. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin made history when Armstrong stepped off the lunar module and onto the moon's surface. He dropped the iconic line, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The U.S. nailed it. The moon wasn't just a dot in the sky anymore. It was a place humans actually stood. New world, conquered. The space race ended, sure, but humanity's journey off Earth, just getting started. July 20th, 1969. Americas did the unthinkable. They put humans on the moon. Apollo 11 fulfilled Kennedy's promise, and Neil Armstrong's first step, seen as a national victory for the whole country and the whole world. But the space race wasn't over yet. After Apollo 11's glory, the big question was what's next for NASA. The immediate mission was to finish the Apollo program. With 5 successful moon landings from 1969 to 1972, astronauts explored different spots on the moon, ran experiments, and grabbed rock samples that might unlock lunar secrets. Each mission just cemented America's undisputed lead in space exploration, but Apollo's success came with a hefty price tag, both financially and in human lives. The program gobbled up resources and attention. By the early 1970s, political support for more moon missions started to fade. The Cold War was still heating up, but the urge to outdo the Soviets in space was losing steam. So, Apollo abruptly ended after Apollo 17 in 1972. The focus of space exploration shifted. Skylab, launched in 1973, was America's first space station, where astronauts lived and worked for extended periods. Conducting experiments in microgravity, Skylab proved humans could survive long-term in space, paving the way for future space stations and deep space missions. Meanwhile, the Soviets, despite early wins, started to slow down their space efforts. They got the first human into orbit, but never managed a moon landing. The race was lost, but the Soviets kept sending robotic missions to explore Venus and Mars, and even launched their own space station program, Salyut, eventually leading to Mir, a giant orbital lab that became the Soviet Union's pride in space science. But it was the space shuttle program that really shaped the next era of space exploration. Launched in 1981, the shuttle was reusable, allowing multiple missions with the same spacecraft. The shuttle era promised easier access to space, enabling regular cargo and crew flights to low Earth orbit. and eventually building the International Space Station, despite these shiny promises. The early shuttle flights were full of challenges, and the tragic loss of Challenger in 1986 reminded the world how risky this all was. But space exploration pushed on, fueled by that shared desire to learn, grow, and break barriers. The government space agency era, shaped by the Cold War race and rivalry, started giving way to a new era, one featuring private companies and international teamwork. The end of the Cold War shifted focus away from competition, but space exploration remained just as captivating. In the 1990s, the International Space Station, ISS, began taking shape in low Earth orbit. Launched in 1998, the ISS was a groundbreaking collaboration among the US, Russia, Canada, Japan, and Europe. This orbital hub became a symbol of what the world could achieve together, rising above past nationalist ambitions and putting science ahead of rivalry. It turned into humanity's largest and most complex space lab, circling Earth at over 17,000 miles per hour, hosting astronauts from many countries living and working in space for long stretches. Meanwhile, the ISS continued to be a center for international cooperation, science research, and tech innovation. Over 17,000 MPH, with astronauts from all over living and working up there for long stretches. Meanwhile, the ISS keeps being the international hangout spot for science and tech breakthroughs, but it also paved the way for a new frontier space privatization. Enter SpaceX, Elon Musk's baby from 2002. His vision cut space travel costs and get humans living on other planets, especially Mars. SpaceX's reusable rockets, game changer. In 2012, their Dragon spacecraft became SpaceX's success in developing reusable rockets totally shook up the space game. In 2012, their Dragon spacecraft became the first private spaceship to haul cargo to the ISS. By 2020, SpaceX hit another milestone when Dragon carried astronauts to the ISS, marking the first time since the space shuttle retired that American astronauts launched from U.S. soil. SpaceX isn't the only private player, though. Companies like Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos's baby, and Virgin Galactic, Richard Branson's pride and joy, have made major strides in commercial space tourism, focusing on suborbital flights for tourists and research. These companies aren't just shaking up the space biz, they're rewriting what citizens can experience beyond Earth. The future of space exploration now includes plans for moon colonies, Mars missions, and commercial space stations. With firms like SpaceX and Blue Origin building the infrastructure to make interplanetary travel a legit thing. In 2021, SpaceX's Starship nailed test flights designed for deep space missions. NASA teamed up with private companies for the Artemis Luna program, aiming to put humans back on the moon, with a sustainable presence planned for the 2020s. Space, once the playground of superpowers, is now an accessible frontier for countries and private companies alike. The dream of exploring Mars and setting up human outposts on other planets isn't just sci-fi anymore. It's the next giant leap in human ambition. And just like in the original space race, the stars are calling again. In sun-drenched Egypt, where endless golden sands stretch beneath a blazing sky, hides a mystery, a lost wonder of the ancient world, so magnificent, in fact, that the great historian Herodotus said it outshines even the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's called the Labyrinth, a massive underground complex, unlike anything anyone had ever seen, sprawling beneath Egyptian ruins. The Egyptians themselves described it as a marvel of architecture and craftsmanship, a maze so complex it boggles the mind. Herodotus, the Greek historian who traveled extensively in the 5th century BC, was one of the first to write about this astonishing place. On his journey, he visited Egypt and got a first-hand look at the labyrinth. What he saw blew his mind, according to his writings. The structure contained huge rooms, intricately designed corridors, and towering walls that surpassed any architectural grandeur known at the time. This wasn't just a building. It was a colossal maze packed with secrets and hidden chambers. Herodotus described the labyrinth as having 12 vast courtyards surrounded by high stone walls. Inside, rooms were filled with carvings, statues, and inscriptions depicting gods and kings who ruled Egypt through the ages. Perhaps most fascinating was Herodotus's emphasis on the sheer scale, not just a few rooms or passages, but a sprawling complex covering huge areas. He insisted the labyrinth was so massive and complicated, it was impossible to fully explore. He even compared it to the pyramids themselves, saying it was more wondrous and impressive, but like many ancient wonders. The labyrinth soon vanished from sight, buried under Egypt's shifting sands. Over time, it became legend, despite its importance. It disappeared from history, swallowed by the desert dunes as if the land itself had devoured it. What he saw left him totally gobsmacked. According to his writings, this place had massive rooms, crazy complex corridors, and towering walls that made any known architecture at the time look like child's play. It wasn't just a building. It was a colossal maze, packed with secrets and hidden spaces. Herodotus described it as having 12 huge courtyards surrounded by towering stone walls. Inside, rooms were filled with carvings, statues, and inscriptions telling tales of gods and kings who ruled Egypt. And probably the coolest part, Herodotus gushed about its sheer scale. Not just a few rooms or passages, but a sprawling complex stretching over vast areas. He claimed the maze was so massive and complicated it couldn't be fully explored. He even compared it to the pyramids, saying it was more magical and impressive. But like many ancient wonders, this labyrinth vanished fast, buried under Egyptian sands. Over time, it turned into legend, despite its importance. It disappeared from history, swallowed whole by shifting desert sands, like the land itself just gobbled it up. Today, scholars and archaeologists keep hunting for this lost maze, hoping to unearth its secrets and crack mysteries hidden. For centuries, the labyrinth Herodotus described wasn't just a building, it was a masterpiece of design, so intricate it seemed beyond human creativity. According to him, It wasn't just a bunch of rooms or hallways, it was a sprawling complex. Its size and complexity proved the level of. Herodotus noted the labyrinth had 12 courtyards, each separated by towering stone walls, surrounding the maze like a fortress ring. These walls were decked out with intricate carvings, showing gods, kings, and mythical creatures straight out of Egyptian lore. Some of these murals were so detailed, they looked almost real, a wild mix of art and architecture on steroids. What made this labyrinth really stand out was its massive scale. Herodotus described a huge network of interconnected rooms, some big enough to fit an entire village inside their walls. He even compared it to the pyramids in terms of grandeur. But unlike the pyramids, with their one main point of interest, this maze was a treasure trove of secrets. Every twist and turn led to another mystery. Herodotus also marveled at the insane number of statues inside the labyrinth. These weren't just random decorations. Legend says they were masterpieces of artistic skill. Some statues looked like Egyptian gods. Others were of pharaohs, all carved into stone. One particularly impressive statue was a giant Osiris towering over the central room, serving as a constant reminder of the divine presence over the entire complex. Probably the coolest part of Herodotus's tale was his take on the labyrinth's layout. The rooms and passageways weren't just randomly thrown together. They were designed to confuse you, to make the whole place feel like a real-deal labyrinth. Herodotus said you couldn't explore the whole thing in just one go. It was just too massive and complicated. He wrapped up his description in awe, calling the labyrinth an eternal wonder, one that would last for millennia. Or at least it seemed that way back then. But despite Herodotus's epic storytelling, the labyrinth got lost in history, buried deep under Egyptian sands, waiting to be rediscovered. The legend of the lost labyrinth has haunted historians, archaeologists, and treasure hunters for centuries. Even with Herodotus's vivid account of the grand underground complex, the exact location remains a mystery. Scholars have debated forever about where it might be hidden beneath the shifting Egyptian sands, and if it's even still intact under all those layers. Most agree it's probably near Lake Moris, an ancient man-made lake in the Egyptian desert close to the Fayum oasis, about 60 miles south of Cairo. Herodotus himself mentioned this spot as the labyrinth's home, linking it to an impressive structure built by Pharaoh Amenemhat II around 1800 BC during the 12th dynasty. The Fayum oasis, with its fertile land near the Nile, has long been a prosperous area in Egypt, and many believe the labyrinth was part of a larger temple complex. This complex might have been dedicated to the crocodile god Sobek, whose ancient cult centered around this region. Some theories even suggest the labyrinth was a temple honoring Sobek, celebrating his connection to the Nile and its cycles. Over the years, many attempts have been made to pinpoint the labyrinth's location, but the shifting desert sands haven't been much help. In the 19th century, British archaeologists and explorers led expeditions in the Fayum area, but only came back with scattered ruins and vague artifacts. They found some strange rectangular stone structures, which some thought might be parts of the labyrinth's walls. But none of these finds were definitive, and no one has identified any specific structure linked to the labyrinth. It was built like a temple to Sobek, probably honoring his connection to the Nile and its cycles over the years. Many attempts have been made to locate the maze, but shifting desert sands haven't given up many solid clues. In the 19th century, British archaeologists and explorers led expeditions into the Fayum area, but they came back with only scattered ruins and vague artifacts. They found some strange remains, large rectangular stone structures that some folks think might have been part of the maze's wall. But these finds aren't conclusive, and nobody's pinned down any specific structure tied to the maze yet. In modern times, tech like satellite images, ground-penetrating radar, and drones have sparked new hope for cracking the labyrinth's secrets. The desert's still huge, and the sand keeps shifting, swallowing everything that might be buried underneath. Lately, some researchers think they're getting closer to the labyrinth's location, suggesting this complex might be hidden beneath a mess of sand dunes, of rubble near Fayum, but the exact spot of the labyrinth still a mystery. And the idea that it's still hidden under all that sand is both thrilling and frustrating. Like many ancient world mysteries, the lost labyrinth calls to anyone brave enough to uncover its secrets. The real question isn't just where it is, but what treasures, or even darker secrets, might be lurking inside its walls. Egypt's lost labyrinth isn't just a massive building project. It's part of a much bigger spiritual and symbolic picture. To grasp the labyrinth's importance, you've got to look at its connection to Egypt's other great wonders, especially the pyramids, which have long been hailed as the pinnacle of ancient Egyptian architectural genius. The Great Pyramid of Giza, built for Pharaoh Khufu, stands as proof of Egypt's power and the complexity of their religious and architectural systems. No surprise, then, that Herodotus, when describing the labyrinth, compared it to the pyramids, seeing both as products of the same cultural and spiritual world. While pyramids are usually linked to royal tombs and the afterlife, the labyrinth might have served a different but equally symbolic purpose. Some theories say the labyrinth was built as a temple complex, not dedicated to one god, but to the broader cosmic forces of Egypt, blending multiple gods and myths that ruled the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Like the pyramids, the labyrinth's design might connect to Egyptian cosmology. The ancient Egyptians believed in a complex, layered universe, a mashup of the physical world and the spiritual realm. The labyrinth, with its vast corridors and secret rooms, might symbolize the soul's journey through the afterlife, just like the pyramids, designed as tombs to help pharaohs cross over. The comparison between pyramids and labyrinths shows they weren't just massive engineering feats, but symbols of life's big mysteries. Some scholars even suggest the labyrinth might have served a ritual function, where initiates faced a gauntlet of trials and spiritual journeys inside. The labyrinth's corridors, it symbolized the soul's trip through the underworld, a path to divine enlightenment, kinda like the spiritual journey those pyramids represent. Plus, Herodotus himself believed the labyrinth had a crazy maze of passages and rooms, as complex as those inside the pyramids, This hints at a deep architectural connection between the two and shared symbolic purpose, guiding both the living and the dead through spaces that blur the line between the physical world and the afterlife. Though the exact connection between labyrinth and pyramids remains unclear, one thing's for sure: both showcase the grand vision of ancient Egypt, a civilization that looked beyond the physical world toward the universe's mysteries and eternity. Egypt's lost labyrinth wasn't just a practical building like a palace or a market. Its existence remains a riddle, and its design shows it was a place with deep spiritual and symbolic meaning. The complex network of halls and chambers, its clever layout, and sheer scale all point to a purpose much bigger than ordinary architecture. Many theories say the labyrinth was a sacred site, a stage for ancient rituals and religious ceremonies. It might have been a temple complex dedicated to worshiping many gods, with Egyptian deities playing a central role in its design. Egyptians were serious about their beliefs, and their monuments often carried spiritual significance, each structure symbolizing different aspects of the afterlife, cosmic order, and the soul's journey. An intriguing theory is that the labyrinth itself symbolized the afterlife. According to ancient Egyptian belief, the journey to the afterworld was complicated and dangerous. The soul of the departed. You gotta get past a bunch of challenges and obstacles between your soul and the divine world. A labyrinth with maze-like structures and hidden rooms might stand for the trials and suffering a soul endures in the afterlife, just like the dead have to find their way through twisting maze paths. They also have to navigate the underworld journey, guided by gods and their faith. The labyrinth could also be a ritual space where priests and initiates face spiritual tests and trials. Some folks guess it was where ancient Egyptian mystery schools passed on sacred knowledge to chosen ones. New initiates might have been led through the labyrinth in carefully staged ceremonies, reflecting their spiritual awakening. The idea of a physical maze representing the soul's journey is pretty powerful. It links the material world with the spiritual realm, tying together ancient Egyptians' ideas about life, death, and rebirth. Another theory says the labyrinth had an astronomical purpose. Those Egyptians knew their stars and celestial moves, which helped them run their farming calendars and religious gigs. The labyrinth's corridors and rooms might mirror the night sky, maybe reflecting the sun's path or the soul's journey through the stars. Whatever it really was, the lost labyrinth remains a mystery. Its symbolism, mystery, and deep connection to ancient Egyptian worldview keep pulling in anyone curious enough to dig up secrets buried under the sand for centuries. Egypt's lost labyrinth has stayed hidden beneath layers of time and dust, but fascination with this mind-blowing architectural wonder never fades. Archaeologists, historians, and explorers keep chasing after it, hoping that modern tech and fresh curiosity will finally unearth the secrets buried beneath Egypt's vast desert. The search for this labyrinth is a long, tough grind. Early explorers and archaeologists used the limited tools of their day to hunt this legendary spot, but hit dead ends. In the 19th century, European expeditions braved the desert, especially around the Fayum Oasis and Lake Morris, places Herodotus pointed to as the labyrinth's possible home. Still, those early digs only turned up scattered ruins and vague clues enough to stir interest, but not enough for any solid discoveries. By the 20th and 21st centuries, tech gave the search a boost. Satellite images, ground-penetrating radar, and modern excavation methods brought fresh tools to the hunt for this lost wonder. With aerial surveys and satellite pics, researchers scanned vast desert stretches where the labyrinth might hide. Some scholars believe beneath the sand still lurk ruins of giant stone structures, reminding us of the great labyrinth Herodotus described. A key spot linked to the labyrinth is the area around Lake Morris and the Fayum Oasis near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis. According to Herodotus and other ancient sources, the labyrinth was built right there. Fayum was a lush oasis, and its importance to Egyptian civilization makes it a prime candidate for the labyrinth's location. Over the years, archaeologists have found the traces of old stone foundations and architectural remains in the area, though no definitive proof of the labyrinth yet. In recent decades, reports have popped up now and then about underwater ruins found near Lake Murex, sparking fresh interest. Some experts think parts of the labyrinth might be submerged, buried under thousands of years of sediment and water. Others guess it could be swallowed by a sand dune near ancient Egyptian cities or temples. The area around Lake Morris and the Fayum Oasis, near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis, is where Herodotus and other ancient sources say the labyrinth was built. Fayum used to be a lush oasis, and its importance to Egyptian civilization made it a prime spot for such a mysterious construction. Over the years, archaeologists have found ancient stone foundations and architectural remains in the area, though no concrete evidence of the labyrinth has turned up yet. In recent decades, there have been occasional reports of underwater ruins near Lake Murex, sparking renewed interest in the site. Some experts believe parts of the labyrinth might be submerged, buried beneath thousands of years of sediment and water. Others speculate it could be hidden under a sand dune near the ruins of ancient Egyptian cities or temples. Despite all this progress, finding the labyrinth remains elusive, but the hunt isn't over. Every new dig, every fresh desert scan carries a flicker of hope that one day this lost labyrinth might reappear, spilling its secrets to the modern world. Egypt's sands might hold more than just forgotten buildings. They could hold the keys, unlocking the deep architectural and spiritual genius of one of history's most impressive civilizations. The hunt for the lost labyrinth isn't just some dusty archaeology quest. It's an attempt to uncover a hidden chapter in Egyptian history, a chapter that could seriously shake up what we know about the ancient world. If they find this labyrinth, it'll reveal insights about architecture, religion, and everyday life of one of the most advanced civilizations ever. One of the coolest things about this labyrinth, it might hold ancient Egyptian knowledge lost for thousands of years, with corridors, chambers, and intricate symbolic carvings. It could be the vault for sacred texts or ritual secrets. Some scholars even guess it might contain documents explaining the deeper spiritual beliefs of the Egyptians, shedding light on mysteries of the afterlife, the gods they worshipped, and rituals they performed to make sure souls safely crossed over. If these texts or symbols survived inside the labyrinth, they'd offer a sneak peek into Egypt's religious ceremonies and customs, unveiling parts of a civilization long buried by time. This labyrinth might also give fresh clues about how ancient Egyptians viewed the cosmos and their understanding of the sky, which was a huge deal in their culture. Many believe the labyrinth's design isn't just an architectural marvel, but also a cosmic map or a spiritual blueprint linking physical space to the divine. Plus, discovering the labyrinth could totally rewrite what we think about ancient Egyptian architecture. The size and complexity Herodotus described hint at advanced building techniques that might have influenced later architectural wonders. Archaeologists are especially curious about how the labyrinth might have inspired grand structures like pyramids and scattered temples all over Egypt. But the significance doesn't stop at religious history or architecture. The labyrinth might also tell us more about Egypt's social and political structure. Was it built by the whim of a single pharaoh, or was it a team effort involving many workers and craftsmen? What does its layout say about how ancient Egyptian society was organized? Finding the labyrinth wouldn't just add a chapter to Egyptology, it would rewrite parts of the story, dropping fresh revelations about ancient Egyptian civilization and its place in world history. For now, the labyrinth stays hidden like a shadow beneath the sand, but with every new clue uncovered, the chances of finding it get closer. The mysteries of the ancient world are still waiting to be cracked, and one day, the lost labyrinth might emerge from the shadows to spill all its secrets. Egypt's lost labyrinth has long been seen as more than just a physical structure. Its symbolic meaning is woven into Egyptian culture and echoes through history, influencing not only ancient Egyptian myths, but also stories from later civilizations. Even after it's gone, the idea of the labyrinth keeps sparking human imagination. Back in ancient Egypt, the labyrinth wasn't just a wonder of architecture, but a symbol representing the soul's journey. This maze-like structure might have been designed to reflect the tough path the deceased had to travel to reach the afterlife. In Egyptian cosmology, the afterlife was a place full of trials, its dangers, and mysteries, where only the worthy could pass through the gates to eternal life. The labyrinth, with its twists and turns, could be a metaphor for the soul's journey through these challenges, winding passages, possibly serving as a metaphor for the soul's journey through these trials. The labyrinth's role in Egyptian culture is probably tied to worship of Sobek, the crocodile god, with temples often located in the Fayum area. Sobek was both creator and destroyer. This duality is mirrored in the labyrinth's power to guide and confuse. The symbol of a mysterious maze guarding secrets might represent the divine's dual nature, nurturing yet terrifying. But the influence of didn't just stop in Egypt. Over centuries, The idea of the maze spread across cultures and mythologies. The most famous tale, the Cretan Labyrinth, crafted by the legendary artisan Daedalus in Greek myth. This maze was built to trap the Minotaur, a half-man, half-bull beast. Unlike the Egyptian maze, this one was all about confusion and deadly traps, a place where only the lost faced certain doom. Over time, the concept of the maze evolved, picking up different meanings in various cultures. In medieval Europe, the maze became a symbol of a spiritual journey, often laid out on cathedral floors as paths for prayer and meditation. Pilgrims would wander these twisted routes as a metaphor for their own path to salvation. The maze idea as a sacred space, one demanding brain power and courage to navigate, crossed borders and cultures, linking it to the bigger human quest for answers, truth, and enlightenment. The maze's ties to life and death, plus its spiritual challenges, cemented its place as a timeless symbol, whether in Egypt, Greece, or later religious traditions. The maze remains a powerful metaphor for the tangled human soul and the struggle to find meaning and purpose. Even though the Egyptian maze lies buried beneath sand, its iconic legacy keeps inspiring and sparking curiosity. It reminds us that some mysteries, though buried, endure, waiting to be uncovered when the world is ready to grasp their deeper meaning. The hunt for Egypt's lost maze isn't over yet. Every year, new tech and methods bring us closer to unlocking its hidden secrets. Despite centuries of mystery, this maze still captivates archaeologists and explorers alike, drawing attention to this ancient wonder and its potential to reveal one of Egypt's greatest lost sites. The area around Lake Moeris and the Fayum Oasis remains the prime focus of digs. Many believe the maze lies somewhere near the ancient city of Crocodilopolis, once a thriving hub and home to the temple of Sobek, the crocodile god. This spot is central to theories placing the maze here because Herodotus himself linked the two places in his writings. In recent decades, advanced technology has breathed new life into the search. Satellite images and ground-penetrating radar (GPR) have let researchers explore previously unreachable or unknown areas, offering fresh clues about what might lurk beneath the surface. These tools help archaeologists spot hidden structures, even those buried under thick sand. In 2017, an aerial survey over the Fayum Oasis uncovered strange terrain anomalies. Large rectangular shapes could hint at ruins or ancient walls, possibly marking the maze's location. Despite these promising finds, most of the maze remains hidden, with desert sands continuing to cover whatever lies beneath. Some think part of the maze might even be submerged beneath Lake Moeris, which has the Fayum Oasis uncovered some odd terrain features. Large rectangular blocks might hint at ruins or ancient walls that could mark the labyrinth's site. Despite these promising finds, most of the labyrinth remains hidden, with desert sands continuing to cloak whatever lies beneath. Some believe part of the labyrinth may lie submerged under Lake Moeris, which has changed shape over millennia. The idea that part of the labyrinth could be underwater gives a fresh hope to those convinced it's still out there, just waiting to be rediscovered.